In a letter posted to UFOevidence.org on March 14, 2015, a female witness described the strange event that happened while driving with a friend to Virginia Beach. It was 1986. The witness, Tina, then 32, was employed at the Club Campground Resort in Lake Gaston in Emporia, Virginia, during the week. She had rented a small lake house for her job, though on the weekends she would drive to Virginia Beach to stay with her mother. Another girl, Sandra, 34, who rented a room in the same lake house and who worked with Tina at the club, would also visit her mother in Virginia Beach and would accompany Tina on the trips. On this night, it was summertime. Tina and Sandra had packed their weekend bags as they had done so many times before and headed out, leaving Lake Gaston after they got off work. I was driving. We were not drinking or on drugs or anything like that. Totally clear-headed. I remember we got to the main traffic light right in Emporia during rush hour. It was right at 5 p.m. and still daylight. The radio was on and we were talking about getting there right at the rush hour. Next thing I know, I felt like I just snapped out of a sleep or something, and my hands were still on the wheel and the car was moving, but we were a few miles outside of Emporia on Highway 58, the far end of town, maybe a 15 or 20 minute drive away. It was where we would have been headed, but we were just there. I had no idea how we got there. I thought for a minute it was one of those things where you drive out of habit and don't remember, but it was pitch black and the radio was on. It said it was around 9 p.m. I was so stunned I could barely grasp it. I asked Sandra something to the effect of, "What the heck just happened?" I asked her if she knew what I was talking about, and she seemed as stunned as I was. She said, yes. She seemed to be in shock too. I asked her what time it was, and she said, "No, it was 5 o'clock. What happened? Why are we here?" She was totally on the same page. I pulled off the road and we were totally freaked out. We both only remember being at the light at rush hour, 5 p.m. daylight, and we both experienced the same thing. All of a sudden, we are 10 miles or so on the other side of Emporia, on the dark road, Highway 58, and it was 3 or 4 hours later. We looked out the window. There was a dark field out there. We were shaking and scared. The two women began pondering aloud if it was possible that they were involved in some kind of abduction, for which they could not remember. We both could only think of an abduction of some sort. It seemed crazy, but had no recollection of the time that was missing. She wondered if maybe someone wanted her because she had worked for NASA. We agreed, for some unknown reason, now looking back, never to speak of this to anyone. We were scared to death. We just were sure they would put us in a mental ward if we told anyone our crazy story. We thought it was crazy too. We got back to Virginia Beach at about midnight, and when I dropped her off, we swore to secrecy. I remember asking her when I picked her up on Sunday night to go back to Gaston if she had said anything, and she said absolutely not. I said, "Me neither. I don't remember if we ever talked about it again. In fact, I don't remember much about her after that." I don't think it was too much longer before I left Lake Gaston forever. I never spoke of it at all until maybe 10 years or so ago. After Tina moved to New Jersey, where she landed a job at another resort, she and Sandra lost touch. For some odd reason, Tina absolutely could not remember Sandra's last name, even though they were quite close. I lost track of Sandra. I have racked my brain trying to remember her last name, but cannot. It's strange because I usually remember everybody, friends from grade school, high school, college, and later. She worked and lived with me, but I cannot remember her last name. Tina is convinced something very strange happened to her and Sandra that night in 1986, though Tina admits that they never observed a craft of any kind. She did find it curious that she grew up in a military family, while Sandra was formerly employed by NASA for at least 5 years. Did this in any way play a role in what happened that night? Had they been chosen? I'm sure some skeptics will suggest that both Tina and Sandra were slipped something prior to leaving Gaston Lake, though if this was the case, How could it be that neither woman remembered even a second in the missing 3 to 4 hours? Also, how could Tina continue to operate a vehicle seemingly without incident? Had she been slipped something, surely it would have impaired her driving somewhat, especially if it's strong enough to wipe out their memories. In the years that followed, Tina came to find out that there had been a rash of UFO sightings in Emporia and nearby Suffolk that same summer. I found this case to be interesting, and it reminded me of another case I would like to discuss. The reasons for me talking about it will become clear. The witness, a man who went by the initials JD, who currently resides in Sacramento, California, related his story on the Coast to Coast radio show back in 2015, a story that involved an aircraft carrier-sized UFO, a possible abduction, missing time, the Oz effect, and even a vanishing implant. I will try to relay his story as he told it to the best of my ability. It was the summer of 1966, Castro Valley, California. JD and his then-girlfriend, whom he would later marry, were prowling the back hills looking for a place to park so they could do the things most young people do when alone in a parked car. It was somewhere between 11:30 and 12 o'clock at night. As they pulled into an area not far from a small lake, they observed an object that was flashing illuminations of red, green, and blue. They both took notice of it and proceeded to watch it for nearly an hour as they sat chatting. Neither could figure out what type of craft it was. Now, what was highly unusual about this is everything I'm about to describe. This spanned from, if you're familiar with the geographical location of Castro Valley area, it spans from the freeway to the end of, there's a lake called Lake Shabbat. The city is closer in between where it was sitting and where we were viewing it, about 3 miles away. Above the craft itself was a cloud layer only above it. The craft, we tried to get a measurement. My uncle is an engineer that helped design the hospital that was in between the site of the actual craft and us. The hospital is approximately 10 stories high. If you turn the hospital to its side long ways, it was longer than 6 of those distances between one end and the other. JD claims that as they watched the craft, a little red dot would appear on one edge of the craft and go across the base where they could see it, and then it would disappear and reappear on the other end of the craft at infrequent speed and time. After studying the object for an hour, the pair became curious. They decided to drive down to get a better look at it. I did want to get to that location. I did want to get a better look, but I didn't want to come directly underneath it, so I thought I would try to drive a little closer to the side of this thing. We drove across the freeway, which we had to do to get down past the Valley Boulevard, to get to that specific area. And 11 o'clock at night in the summertime, you have kids cruising up and down the strip in their hot rods. I used to do the same thing. But on that particular night, as we crossed the freeway, there was no cars whatsoever on the freeway anywhere. Now this is the weekend. JD and his girlfriend drove across and eventually came up on it. This would set into motion a series of strange and frightening events. Their evening of fun would turn into sheer terror. We drove right on up to the craft. We could actually see it above us. We drove to the edge of it, but the girlfriend at the time, who ended up being my wife, she was talking to me, and all of a sudden there was a sound that came from inside the car. We rolled down the windows to make sure we had good air circulation. It was nothing to do with the car. She stopped in the middle of what she was saying, and I couldn't wake her, but I continued driving up, closer to the end of this craft. It was gigantic, but as I got closer to this craft, the car started to slow down. The engine started to slow down, and I accelerated, and it still kept slowing down. Then I started hearing this loud frequency emitting from the center of the car outward. I couldn't wake my girlfriend at that time. We headed on up, and I almost felt like the energy from the top of my head was being drawn out, just drained. I tried to shake myself, make sure I was seeing what I was seeing, doing what I was doing, and I checked the car to make sure it was still slowing down. I couldn't believe what happened. I turned the car around. I could still see this huge craft. We head back down the hill, and then all of a sudden my girlfriend woke up and was in the middle of the same conversation. We headed back down into Castro Valley Boulevard. The craft was gone. All of a sudden, everybody's cruising down on the strip. The lights are on. People are driving on the freeway as usual. Now, this is the unusual part. Immediately, she was shocked. I thought we were going up. How did we turn around? When we got back down to the road, she came instantly too, back in her conversation when she stopped. JD claims that as they came down the hill, he felt his consciousness slipping away, and he had to fight to maintain it in order to get them away from the craft. He did not see it depart. Another thing, later that night, she couldn't sleep, and I was fine, but she couldn't sleep. She was agitated. She was very irritable. She had this lump on her arm that was bulging out of her arm. Now here's what really got me. I took a needle, I sanitized it, and I pricked it with the needle. I pulled this metallic object about 1/4 of an inch out of her skin. I checked it out with some tweezers, and it was held together. What it looked like was a very miniature Sputnik. You remember that? All these metallic hairs were still under her skin. I pulled it all out, and she almost panicked. At the time, JD's father worked for NASA, and he thought it would be best to send the object to him. He felt that his father might have a better understanding of what they were dealing with. They placed it into an envelope and sealed it. Strangely, when they woke the next morning, the object inside the envelope had disappeared completely. We both placed it inside the sealed envelope, but when we woke up the next morning, the object wasn't there. First of all, the envelope was still sealed. We opened it up and it was gone. It was no longer inside. About a week later, JD returned to the location where they had observed the craft. He found the area was close to the public, which he found strange. About a mile away was a satellite tracking station, so JD went there and asked them some questions, like had they seen any odd activity in the area in the past few weeks. A manager came out to speak to JD. He seemed interested, though JD was reluctant to delve too deeply into his sighting. The manager directed him to the South Bay Moffett Field, insisting that he speak to some authorities. He even wrote it down for him, though JD ultimately never bothered. Curiously, JD, despite marrying her, acknowledged that there was a very noticeable change in his wife's personality after the object was removed from her arm. Once a very gentle, kind woman, she eventually turned violent and angry, and they soon divorced. Regarding the night of their sighting, JD noted that his wife was insistent that she was conscious throughout the experience, though she could not understand how the car got turned around. To this day, she swears she never passed out. She swears we never even got to the top of the mountain. Now I believe I had gotten to the top, and before I lost consciousness, I turned the vehicle around and started driving right back down, and then she woke up. So therefore, if she believed that she was never up there. Jimmy Church, who was hosting that evening, cut him off, wondering aloud that if, since his wife was certain she never passed out, was it also possible that JD, who did not recall passing out, may have indeed become unconscious at some point and just wasn't aware of it? Was it possible that both JD and his wife had become unconscious for a period of time, or possibly taken aboard the craft? According to JD, in the weeks that followed, large pad marks were found in the park where the craft was sighted. The park was closed and the area was examined by some officials, though JD was uncertain who those officials were. Photographs of the marks were taken, marks that seemed to indicate that something very heavy had settled down in the park. JD had seen at least one of the photos, though he did not indicate how he was allowed access to them. Was it in the local paper? Sadly, there were no other eyewitnesses to the event, and JD and his wife were reluctant to talk about it for many years. One aspect of this case I found interesting was the way in which the lights were seemingly used to draw the attention of the couple, almost hypnotizing them to come closer. It's almost like a moth to a flame. As they crossed the normally busy street, both JD and his girlfriend found it strange that there was no traffic at all. The area should have been bustling. It was a weekend, and teenagers should have been racing up and down the strip. But there was nothing. How could this be possible? Upon approaching the craft, JD indicates hearing strange noises, at which point his girlfriend seemed to black out mid-sentence. Later, upon regaining consciousness, the girlfriend picked up her speech exactly where she left off, as if there was no lapse in time from one word to the next. JD himself felt as though his energy was being sucked out through his head, at which point he began to frantically check to see if the object was real, if his car was still slowing down, as if his brain needed some reassurance that what was happening was really happening. He does not recall blacking out, though, as Church pointed out, neither did his girlfriend, though she did indeed seem to black out. So, did he also? Upon moving away from the craft, they noted that the traffic seemed to return to the boulevard, as if somebody had flipped a switch, allowing reality as they knew it to return. Upon arriving home, the pair discovered a strange object buried in the girlfriend's skin, an object that seemed to vanish with no explanation. This is common in many abduction cases, and also in fairy lore. It's as if some cosmic force had stepped in to remove from existence any evidence that may have been left behind that could prove without a doubt that these things are real. It's a curious other detail that JD's father worked for NASA, not unlike the girl from the first story. I spoke to Albert Rosales about this, and he did indeed confirm that there seems to be a large number of cases involving people who work for NASA, or who have family members who do. Not sure what it means, but it's an interesting little detail. Getting back to the Castro Valley case, if the area was indeed closed for a period of time afterwards, and landing marks were found and examined, it does suggest that somebody else, somebody in a position of power, was aware of the UFO that came down in the Castro Valley that summer evening in 1966.